We'll call the Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, October 29th to order. First item is roll call.
Miller,
Here.
Misato, Beck,
Here.
Knopf,
Here.
Chanson, Salvati,
Here.
Wolf,
Here.
O'Brien,
Here.
Callahan,
Here.
Meitzler,
Here.
Malay,
Here.
Ewer,
Here.
Sabrone, and McFadden.
Here. Okay.
On the north side.
I think we have enough people to conduct business tonight. Reminder to speak into the microphone for BATV for the recording. Next up would be approval of the minutes for October 1st, 2019. Anybody have any questions, comments, corrections? If not, motion for approval.
So moved. Second.
Motion by O'Brien, second by Salvati. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next up would be items to be removed, added, or changed. Do we have anything this evening?
No.
Okay. We will move right on then to matters from the public for items that are not on the agenda. So if anybody wants to speak to anything that's not on the agenda tonight, come forward. Okay. Nothing there tonight. Next up will be ordinance 19-67, amending the text of the zoning code for the city of Batavia. Drew, do you want to start this off, or Laura, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, since Dan's not here.
Or Drew.
Or that
We can
Drew.
let Drew do it.
Drew or Drew.
Let Drew
Drew
take
or
it.
Drew.
Either Drew.
Yes.
This would be CD, so
Yeah, it's listed under that.
I can just go ahead and start.
Go ahead.
Yeah, essentially, the ordinance before you tonight has definitions for items related to cannabis, or recreational and cannabis that was legalized by the state with the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, and would be effective January 1st. On August 27th, the committee did discuss the issue initially, along with having an opportunity for public comment, and the direction at the conclusion of that discussion was to prepare and present definitions of these uses so that basically with future conversations among the committee, there can be basically a consensus as to what we're talking about with which each of these types of uses. So there would really be no change in terms of the status of these uses. Effectively, anything that's not listed in the zoning code right now with a zoning district that allows these uses, they would basically be prohibited until such time that changes. So there would be definitions added for cannabis business establishment, cannabis craft growers, cannabis infuser organizations, cannabis processing organizations, and transporting organizations. The definitions that we have in place for the cultivation facilities, which is where cannabis is grown, would be modified to include a reference to recreational cannabis. And then the two definitions for dispensaries would remain unchanged really by this ordinance. So again, it's just putting these items in the text of the code. It's not changing the status of those uses. There's a couple of other minor amendments in this proposed text. One relating to adding definitions of different yard types. Essentially, there's a few times in the zoning code where yards are referenced versus setback areas, and that's basically what it boils down to is what you're providing in your front of your property or at the rear of your property is your yard, whereas the setback area is the required area under the zoning code. So it just, in a few different items that we regulate, there's a use of the terminology of yard, but we didn't have it defined, so we've added that. And then the one other change is to basically update our definition of banks and financial service institutions. In 2015, we added personal loan agencies to the zoning code, which is basically a check cashing establishment, but there was still a reference to that type of use in the banks and financial service definition. So to get rid of any ambiguity, we're deleting that reference. So the Plan Commission did recommend approval of these changes. They did understand that they were not making any decisions on the uses themselves, and so they did recommend approval with a positive recommendation, and the ordinance is before you tonight based on that recommendation.
And several of these definitions came out of State statute.
Yeah, it's a combination of the state statute, and IML provided basically a draft, so we use those as the basis for these definitions, just so there's consistency with what the state is calling all these uses.
Right. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. I get the concept, and I know this is coming to a head, so this makes sense. I'm not against any of this process, but if there's a business out there right now that we haven't thought of, do we feel obligated to put it in the code, or does everything that's not already in existence fall under the, hey, you better get approval because it doesn't exist right now? You know what I'm saying? Like, because
Yeah, I think-
we're changing text for something that we still don't allow, and that may happen, but what if it was a business of selling moon dust that hasn't been regulated, hasn't been
good
approved
stuff.
or anything like?
Yeah, so the way that I would answer that is because we allow some of those things that are part of the code that regulates that business in general. If we didn't have anything to do with it, then I would tend to agree with you that perhaps we would not address it, but because there are some allowable uses for cannibal-related businesses, then we would like to cover those aspects of the state.
I will not support cannibal
That's a
business.
that's a different ordinance. We're going to be addressing that next.
Sorry.
We're definitely a foodie destination.
No, I
Sorry.
get it in this case, I'm all for, but I wasn't,
Yes.
it just triggered the question. I'm like,
I am.
To piggyback on
That makes sense.
what Laura said.
Sorry.
Yeah, essentially, with the zoning code, when there is basically not a use listed, it defers to the zoning officer to make a determination as to whether there's a use that closely fits it. So the situation we might have if we did not put these definitions is for like some of the processing and manufacturing items, there might be some ambiguity as to whether we're actually allowing those or not. So by
Right.
adding those definitions, we're effectively saying this is something that's different than just a manufacturer or a food processor or something like that.
And we did do this with the medical marijuana cultivation centers. We changed all,
That was where I was going.
when the law changed at that point too. So it's good to be proactive.
Right. And we actually, at that time, added the definition for recreational cannabis, basically kind of as a preemptive thing in case the state made that change, which came a few years later. So.
Anyone else? Anyone from the public? With that, I will recommend we approve to council ordinance 19-69, amending the text of the zoning code, City of Batavia applicant.
Second?
Motion by Callahan, second by Beck. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Can we put that on consent? All right, we'll put that one on consent.
Okay.
Okay, next up would be the Water Street Studios, forgive the loan, year 10.
Some serious feedback coming in right now.
Yeah, I can't believe it's already year 10.
It is year 10, indeed. The loan date started in August of 2019. We established the new Batavia Arts Center, Water Street Studios, to create affordable gallery and workspace for up to 25 artists to promote the arts within the community and add new and active uses to the downtown. The loan was scheduled to be forgiven over a 10-year term for each successful year that Water Street maintained a minimum occupancy level. And it has, again, this 10th and final year, maintained the minimum occupancy level required. And as such, they've requested that we consider per the terms of the agreement forgiving the final $8,500 in the loan. Any questions? Hearing none, I will make a motion that we approve the Water Street, or recommend for approval the Water Street Studios forgivable loan for 2019.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And consent,
Can we
We
put
wanna
that
talk
on the
about it?
regular agenda?
regular.
We can
All right.
talk about it, say, what we're doing for the community?
Yeah, sounds good.
I think it's one of the best investments that we've done as a city
Absolutely.
council as I've been on here.
Yeah.
the return that we've had on the money we've put into that, I think, has been pretty big.
Well, it just kind of establishes Batavia kind of as a budding art colony, and the arts are good for the community. So we can talk about it a bit.
Okay, next up would be discussion on expansion of the video gaming ordinance to allow for holders of a E3 liquor license.
All right. So, as it stands right now, our ordinance currently allows video gaming terminals in liquor establishments that hold a Class A or D license for consumption on the premises, as well as for licensed veterans establishments, truck stop establishments, or licensed fraternal establishments. We've had a request from the owner of a business holding a Class E3 license, which is a bowling and amusement center license, requesting an expansion of the video gaming code to allow E3 license holders also to be allowed to have video gaming terminals on their premises, so long as all the other requirements of the code have been met. Pursuant to recent amendments to our zoning code, video gaming is a conditional use for which any new or expansion of existing license requires approval by the city council. Therefore, even if the council votes to amend the gaming ordinance to include E3 license holders, any business owner desiring to place video gaming terminals on their property would need to apply for a conditional use. There, of course, are pluses and minuses. The opportunity for the business to earn extra income. The city also receives a 6% share of the earnings from the additional machines. Of concern is the substantial presence of minors in such an establishment. However, the same could be said of restaurants geared towards children who will also hold a Class D license. So maybe at this point that this is up for discussion as to whether or not we want to expand video gaming in town. I haven't been a fan from the start, so I'm probably not going to support this, but anybody else have anything to say?
I'll go ahead and start. I brought this up after we came back from the downstate visit, that I'd started looking into it, and it was something that I would rather not have at all. I understand business owners do make a significant amount of money off of it. Unfortunately, I think it's one of those things that takes advantage, not the business is necessarily doing it, but gambling in general takes advantage of those that are least able to be taken advantage of, I guess. I mean, it's just something that I think that we should try and discourage in our town. So, let's leave it at that.
Scott?
Well, I'm not necessarily for gambling. I do, since it's here and we do have, it is available for those that, that have different licenses. I don't see why we wouldn't consider this for an E3. Honestly, I mean, if it's that's where we start kind of making judgment calls. So given, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of it, but again, if we're doing it for one segment, we really have to look at all the segments and be fair with it. So it's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I was actually opposed to the initial with the restaurants and all of that. But actually, when you think about it, if there's any type of business that it should have been allowed in first, it should have been this, because it is gaming, and it would go right along with all the other gaming activities that are in an establishment such as that. It kind of goes to the, one of the concerns with kids getting to it. But they actually go back to their gaming stations, which just print out tickets, as many as they can win. So it's video gaming just with a different type of monetary dispensing. It's the same kind of thing. And this falls under gaming, in my opinion, so it would make sense for this to be allowed here.
Nick?
I agree wholeheartedly with that. I voted for this, and I'm sorry I did, but at this point, this is the one place that I would approve it for. But what I'd like to ask is, the owners are here, if they can come up and explain how they're going to segment this away from the children's area and ensure that it's for adults only. Can you guys come up and answer?
Hi, everyone. This has been a tough decision for me over the last few years. Some of you were around when the ordinance first came up about this, and I think at the time I was wearing my chamber hat, which was, let's open up some more revenue for other businesses to survive, because really some of this gaming is helping those really survive, paying their rent, paying their bills and things. We're up against the same thing now, kind of unexpectedly last year when the minimum wage increase. It's going to bump 30% over the next 4.5 years. That's a huge number for us with the employment age group that we have. And we're looking for additional revenue sources. So over the last year, I've taken a survey within our customers and friends and family and everybody around. Last thing I want to do is ruin Funway's image. I don't want somebody coming in and saying, oh, they got video gaming, I'm leaving. That's not what I want. The gaming will be, if you consider it, behind a wall in a storage area on the north side of our bar. There'll be a 3 to 4 foot door. The door will be a plan is to put like a barn door where we can slide the door open and closed. It's in a room that's a storage area right now. So during groups and things, when we have school groups during the day, the door will be closed. When the bar is not open, the gaming will not be open, period. So when the bar is open and we have an attendant there, the gaming door will be open. There's not going to be any neon signs all over the place. There'll be one little sign that says adults only or whatever the state requires. I can't recall the language right now, but it's 21 and over only. We will have also surveillance cameras in the bar area for the bartender to watch, along with their view, because you have to be in sight of the room. One person has to be inside of the room. And then also there'll be another video monitor around the manager's corner on the other side. So I've done my homework on this, and I'm not a big fan of gambling either, but it is an additional resource for us, and it is open to many other businesses. And I just like smoking back in the day. We built our bowling center to be smoke allowed, right? Smoking was allowed. A lot of bowlers smoked back in the day, and we spent a lot of extra money. And 3 years later, all of a sudden it was gone. I spoke then about that, and if it's fair across the board, that's great. But when you're singled out and you're not allowed to, that's a little tougher as a business owner to absorb. So I can answer any questions you might have, but hopefully I answered your question as well.
It answered mine. Thank you.
I don't have a question for you, Bob, but I guess just in general, I would say I was not here when the initial gambling licenses were being considered. I was actually listening in the audience at the time before I originally was sworn in beforehand. So I did not have a stake in this one. I think I've shared in the past I would have voted against it. When we had the vote to discuss tighter language and restrictions around it, I was certainly supportive of making that a tighter since we already had it. But I'm not in support of expanding it, and it has nothing to do with the current establishment that's looking for it. I think I truly believe that is probably the best way, if it were to be allowed, is to frame it outside of view to where it is only seen there. But again, I would not have supported adding video gaming of this nature, and so I don't want to see it expand either.
Tony?
Yeah, I'm torn on it too. I totally hear what you're saying, that the equity piece, allowing some business, this business does, I agree, Marty, lends it. Again, I wasn't there at the time. I would not have supported it. But that same argument about equity, I would say there's a problem with equity in those that can least afford gambling end up gambling. And that's a greater equity issue that I see, and so I would have a hard time supporting expansion. I would have preferred that we didn't do it in the first place. I wasn't here.
I have a question. Just how do we know that it's the ones who can least afford it are the ones gambling? I mean, I don't see that. I don't gamble.
There
but I
have been
just,
studies on that.
no, I've just never seen that, so I just want to know how we know that.
Well, I just you know, I'm not sure on that, number one. And I know this is a conditional use, you know, so, and that's actually not what we're talking about tonight. We're just talking about amending the ordinance. But knowing the organization that would like to do this, if anyone can actually present this in a way that protects from younger kids from getting involved or whatever, it's this organization. They don't have a velvet rope and that's it. And I get, again, I go back, I'm not a fan of it, but I do know if anyone's going to do it right, it will be them. And I do think we need to consider the equity part of this. I really do. If they're holding the license and they're qualified to do it, and probably well more qualified than many of the other holders and the people that are doing this in this town, I have a hard time not looking at that.
Hey, Drew.
Mike,
Yeah, how many E3 licenses do we have outstanding right now?
I believe there's only one bowling. E3.
One.
So we're expanding our ordinance to include one more business. I don't see how we could not let a business owner take that opportunity. This, to me, is a moot point. I have relatives that live in senior citizen centers, and they have days out at the track or the gambling center. They go to Joliet. I don't see how that's any different than what we're doing right now, so I would definitely support something like this, absolutely.
Well, I guess, you know, we've had ministers come before us and say that this is going to destroy the fabric of families. I mean, I haven't seen that either. You know, Chief, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Do you see that in the community? That
I don't have any data points that would support that information, but I can tell you in regards to expansion, I'm not talking about the merits of this individual request. I think Mr. Hanson runs an excellent business down South River Street. But the police department is queried regularly about expanding the video gambling ordinance for all kinds of other businesses. So I guess the only thing I would caution the council to consider is expanding for this business may open the floodgates, to, I guess, so to speak. We've had liquor stores query us about it. We've had food stores query us. At this point, you know, it's not contained within the ordinance. Now, I would say that the city ordinance is much more restrictive than the state code or the state law on this. It's much more expansive. Basically, it allows any retail liquor license holder at the state level.
Thank you. So, I mean, so we are conditional, right? Conditional use. So if we, I mean, I'm in favor of granting it. So if we grant it, we can still, next person comes in front of us, we can decline it. And so, I see, as Mike said, that it just, you know, a lot of older people, you know, they're living alone, solitary lives. They lost families and friends as they get older. This is just something for them to do, to occupy their time, some release, some enjoyment. I have, my wife has people, aunts who are in their 80s, and they gamble. I mean, they enjoy themselves, so I don't have any issues with it, I guess, so.
And if I could address that's not our target. Our target's not the destination person who wants to use the video game. Our target is a casual adult that's in the facility, stepping over there, having a drink, playing a game. That's our target. Our target, it's not Elgin, the boat, or Aurora, the boat. That's where the other folks go for their entertainment. Like, I had an aunt like that also. I couldn't believe it after I was cleaning her house out, how many tickets she had from that boat. Yeah, that was her entertainment. That was great for her. We didn't know as a family, but she hid that. You know, so that's not our target, though. Our target is just the casual use, additional revenue, where, in my opinion, as a business owner, the neighbors can do it. Why can't we? Right.
True.
Joe. Yeah, let me get, it sounded like Joe on the phone, and then would like to hear from the mayor.
Yeah,
And
I was holding my hand up, but you couldn't see me. I walk up to the machine, I put some money into it, and I've got a chance of getting rewarded something, a lot of something, or nothing. Is that a video gambling machine and I'm an adult? Or am I an 8-year-old kid looking to get a ticket so I can go turn that ticket in for something else? I don't see the difference when we talk about excluding children and keeping this away from children, when children are already exposed to it at several locations within our town. I've gone to some of these locations with kids, with kid parties, and sat there thinking, okay, this is fun. Not really. As an adult, it'd be nice to have something geared towards me that I could walk over to and take that same chance, maybe get a reward, maybe not. I at first I had a problem with it, but when I look at it that way, I don't see an issue with this because we already have kids exposed to some form of gambling, even though we don't call it gambling in our society.
Abby?
I lived in Las Vegas for 6 years, and when I came home and saw that this was an issue here at home, I thought that was really weird. But so I wouldn't have been in support of it had I been sitting here when we first discussed it. But my kids have all been to Las Vegas. My husband grew up there, and he grew up going to the arcade attached to the casino while his parents went. He turned out great, so I'm not really worried about the kids at all, and we'll still take our kids to Funway. And I do also agree that if any place should have it in town, it's Funway with the setup that they're going for. When I was in Las Vegas, we knew of a family that owned a chain of taverns and strip malls all over the city, and they made so much money off of their gaming. I think that paid all of their overhead. Anything like beer and food was just extra. And what I noticed in going to those types of chain places, and I know again this is completely separate from what the applicant is asking for, and a completely different. I'm not assigning these things to you, but I could tell that the level of effort that they put into the rest of their business was pretty low. They didn't have to. They had games that's all they needed to do. And not that there's no comparisons you can draw between Batavia and Las Vegas, but the level of community engagement, the level of business engagement in the community was really low because they didn't have to. They didn't have to invest in school fundraisers. They didn't have to sponsor X, Y, and Z. They had video gaming. It was just, these are the comments I would have made all those years back had I been there, because it's not applicable to Funway. But I don't like it. I don't want to see it expand. I worry what the chief was saying, that grocery stores will have it, will ask for it, and liquor stores will ask for it. They're everywhere. I mean, they're in every grocery store in Las Vegas. Again, I'm not saying we're in a slippery slope to Las Vegas, but it's all I can hear and all I can see, and it just, I don't know. I don't love it for our town.
Anyone else? Mayor?
Yeah, I get the same calls that Chief Ewell gets, and he and I talk about this with some regularity. There's a whole bunch more people waiting in the wings here to come in and ask for licenses. And the grocery store is one of them. And I've got another group of folks that want to come in and open up a Betty's or a Dolly's storefront where they would just invite you in and they'd have 5 machines and some beer in a cooler someplace, and mostly they want to sell you coffee and just let you sit there and play all afternoon. I got 2 different groups that want to do that have talked to us. Then I had an interesting call from a gentleman who claims to be from the gambling industry, and he tells me that Batavia's gambling ordinance, we should be increasing our fees for these machines. We're not as high as we could be. And so if we're going to bring these machines in here in the volume that want to come, if this is a moneymaker for the city, we should be charging more. We should have the city attorney research for us what we really can charge for these machines. I'm told we may be $500 shy per machine in Batavia on a yearly basis if we know what we're doing with this thing. So we could be making more money. I don't know. I probably am on the side of those who do not think this is too great of an idea. Certainly have great respect for Funway and all they do down there, and it's no reflection on them. It's just my own personal sentiments about what we're doing here. But there is a whole group of folks waiting to come in here and add to the machine issue. And I was at the CMAP Council of Mayors meeting this morning, and the whole gaming thing in the state of Illinois came up as not during the meeting, it was a sidebar conversation. And the word out there is that there's now so much gaming in Illinois that nobody thinks they're making much money off of it, especially those who are trying to cite the 7 more casinos that have been allowed for in Illinois, that there's so much more tax and so much more competition out there with the video poker and the sports betting and everything else that's going on is that, it's saturated, and it's, nobody is really rolling in any money, and the cities that have had it for a long time are now really crying the blues about their loss in revenue off these things, because it isn't what it once was for those who started the business a few years ago in Illinois.
Nick?
I'm going to support this, even with that, but I want to make clear, and it seems like there's consensus, just because people are knocking on the doors. This is an application, there's one of them, it fits. I wouldn't be supportive of the dollies and those and the stores and those things. We've got, the chief said, we've got the tightest ordinance around, and we can keep it that way. It's conditional use. We have control. This doesn't necessarily open the door for everyone. We can still control that, and I still be in support of this and against others.
Anybody else? What action are you looking for from us tonight? Just direction as to
Yes.
whether to go draft the ordinance and bring it back?
Exactly. Whether you're in favor of changing the ordinance to allow carriers of the E3 license, so long as they've met other requirements of the statute, to also have video gaming license.
Is there a reason we can't, if we're for it, that we can't propose this to city council?
There is not.
There's
I was
just
just
no,
wondering why.
yeah, there's just no ordinance, so
Right.
they're
Yeah,
looking
right.
for direction. Based on
Yeah.
the discussion, I think I heard there was enough support.
To draft the ordinance
to
and have
draft
that
the
voted
ordinance and bring it
upon.
back to,
We can either bring it to Cal, or if you're saying to bring it to city council, it can be voted on there.
No, if it has to
Just
go,
bring
I
it to
mean, I
Cal?
would say let's bring it back to
Let's
Cal
bring
and
it to
discuss
Cal.
it more. Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
All right.
Jessica, question on the mayor brought up about the fees for that. I thought that was one of the things that, after it was initially passed, that we did review, and the statutory was $25 per machine. And that was a way that we wanted to make sure that we didn't have the expansion. We went up to 1,000.
Yes.
Are you saying that we could probably even go higher?
Oh, it's 1,500 now.
Okay. Yeah, I knew that we kind of pushed it to what we thought we could do at that point. I know we have a lot of leeway under home rule to begin with, which was why we did it. So if we need to go,
I was going to, based on this conversation, ask the city attorney to give us a memo about what our fees could be. But, the gaming industry calls you and they're trying to entice you into getting it. So they say, your fees are too low for your machine, your license, not the individual machines, but the license that we give the guy that's got the machines.
and I think that's worthy to look at, because that was one of the reasons that we made sure that we didn't want to see it just every single place by it being too low.
Yeah.
So it's a way to put a check in place.
I agree. I presume that would be a separate discussion.
Yeah, I'm going to I'll ask Kevin to prepare a memo for your review.
All right. Fantastic. All right. Thank you. I think you have direction now?
Any other?
Yeah, I will present an ordinance to Committee of the Whole for approval.
Fantastic. Anything else?
No, just wanted to reiterate that, I've been trying to decide what to do with this for a while now, and in my surveys, the customers again, and friends and folks and respected guests that we have all the time, it didn't change the image. It's all over the place, as you've mentioned before. It is a different society now than 20 years ago. And, I would not do anything to deter a customer from coming in our establishment at all. So what, you all represent the community. I respect your decision, whichever way it goes. I mean, Funway will survive without this, but it's just an additional source of revenue for us. Thank you.
I appreciate you coming down tonight and talking to us.
All right.
Okay. Next up will be project status.
So one of the things that we discovered last week is that we've heard that the IDNR is moving forward with plans to fund removal of the low-head dams. And specifically, the city of North Aurora has been asked to update and renew their the documentation requesting removal of their dam, and that we've been given indication that perhaps Batavia could be one of the next to be in line for that. That, of course, is great news, but it prompts the question of an important decision that the city needs to make as to what if we want to maintain the depot pond, which is a primary feature of our downtown, and if so, what is the cost of that? Because it will primarily, in fact, all probably be borne by the city of Batavia and not by any other groups. Unless, of course, one of the previous proposals was to continue that berm that comes from the end of the peninsula through Duck Island and then northwest to the other bank. And if the bike path was perhaps continued over that, that might open up the proposal for the potential for there to be CMEC, the congestion elimination grants. Perhaps we could apply for something in that regard to assist us with that. So that's kind of good news that in 1 week, it was such a change from, we expected it to be a very long time until funding sources might be available at the state level for the removal of those dams. But I think that the state, not only from the perspective of safety issue having to do with the dams, but they're realizing that more and more people are using the river for recreational, whether it be canoeing or kayaking, and that removal of the dams allows the river to be more navigable all the way from, Waukesha, Wisconsin, down to Ottawa, Illinois. And the more we can do for that, the better, as well as the opportunities to increase the health of the fish population along the way that then can increase that type of recreational use as well. So that was really good news. Another thing that are projects that we're working on, we have a number of businesses who are contacting our economic development department and wanting to locate their businesses in Illinois. They provide us with specifications about where they would like to be, what type of square footage that they're looking for, and we've had about one per week where they come in and we have provided them with a list of potential locations and driven them around to see these various locations. And, they're not only impressed with the stock of type of available spaces that there are, but the cool feeling that's here now, that this is a place where some exciting things are happening with all of the new businesses that we have coming here. So the development that we have is generating a lot of interest from outsiders. As well, I had a call from one of the communities who attended the Active Transportation Alliance meeting that we had here with over 40 people that we took on a tour of our downtown. She said, Laura, can you send me pictures of River Street and some documentation about how that all came to be? Because we would like to present that to our board in our town to show them, if you make an investment in things like that, the wonderful things that can come from that. So not only was it a great experience to show everybody some really nice attributes of our downtown, but it's generating interest from outside, kind of putting a spotlight on us. So just wanted to share those things. As always, the leaf pickup is a challenge in that we always seem to have a major snowstorm that is a possibility just as all of the leaves come down. So I guess I would encourage folks to take the opportunity when they can to move their leaves out of their yard as soon as possible. But also, I'd like to make a plug for mulching. You know, so many of us push our leaves out to the curb and use the city services to have those leaves removed from the yard, but gardens love the mulched leaves. And so to the extent that you can find a way to just mulch them and put them right back into your flower beds, that's maybe mulch that you don't have to buy next year. And it's very good for the environment as well. Any particular projects that you have questions about? Yes.
On the dam removal project, I think we had already had the Park District in at least once to discuss that, so I think we make sure that we get them back involved
Absolutely.
immediately with that. And then there, I believe, was money when we were at the IDOT meeting the last time we were downstate, that they did talk about the CMAQ grant, excuse me, that there is engineering money available if we can tie that to a plan with a bike path involved with it, especially with the traffic issues that we have in town. So
Great.
that's something that I think we should explore immediately. You know, to try, because that was engineering money to try to help with figuring out how to do the burn to save the pond.
Gary.
Go ahead, Gary.
Just with respect to the CMAQ funds, which would be the congestion mitigation funds that may be applicable for extension of the bike path. The rules for CMAQ require phase 1 study be done. That's why we had to, if you recall, we had to pay Trotter to prepare a phase 1 study for the path around the wastewater treatment plant before we were able to apply for those funds. So unless those rules have changed, I would think that we're going to have to self-fund up front phase 1 study before we would be able to apply for those funds. And then those funds are on a cycle. So if you don't, like the treatment plan, I think it was now been a couple of years since we applied. The next opportunity, I think, for application is coming up.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to get on a cycle. So I'm just saying that from a timing standpoint, because you'd have to have everything fall in perfect place to have the dam and the timing of that all fall in place in order to get the funding. If not, it may not be a viable funding.
Is that March? Is it right around there? Beginning of March is the cutoff? If I remember from the last time we...
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And it's not annually, though.
Right.
Marty?
Did I hear you correctly in that we would be the sole funding responsibility for preserving the dam?
Preserving the depot pond, not the
Sorry, for preserving the depot pond.
Yes. Unless we were able to secure other grant funding. The IDNR is interested in the removal of the dam, but if there is a ancillary draining of that pond that would result from that, there probably would not be IDNR funds that could assist us with that.
What about park?
That we could see through the park whether they're able to.
Well, and that's what it goes into the question of whose responsibility is the depot pond, because
Park District owns it.
I'm sorry.
Park District owns it.
Right, exactly. So why would we preserve something at our expense that we don't own fully? I think they're going to have to ante up into it, and it actually goes back to, I was looking at the Kane County Chronicle, going back to our discussions in 2016 where we did have those joint meetings, and it was a joint coordinated effort where the park board came in and we came in, and we even discussed that it would be a sharing of the consulting firm to study the project.
And what I meant when I said the city of Batavia, I just meant not the state of Illinois. So I'm not, I didn't
Right.
mean that the Park District now was not our partner in this. They have continued to be our partner. There have been ongoing discussions. Even earlier this year, we sat down with the Park District and we're talking about, and we met with St. Charles together because we wanted to know about what was their process to get to the point that they're at in their planning.
But if they don't want to fund any of it, I would be kind of hard pressed to save something that is their responsibility that they would not want to save.
And I haven't heard that from them.
Yeah, no,
that
that's
they're
where I'm
unwilling.
just kind of making sure that it should be a shared, if not, it shouldn't be our responsibility in full.
Do we have, you had said the dam in North Aurora was first on their radar, and we would be close behind. Do we have any idea of timing for sure, like when they would be looking for us to submit?
So the individual who we talked with is their director of community outreach, and he said that the very next step is that he's going to put the individual who is in charge of the project planning to get us a meeting where that individual will come out, and then I imagine those type of details would be what we discuss at that meeting. Yes.
A leaf question, and forgive me because I think it either came up at a past meeting or I've asked you directly, Gary, but have there been discussions about having a leaf pickup in the spring for those of us that do kind of keep our leaves on our garden over the winter? We end up then accumulating a lot over the winter and need somewhere to put it first thing in the spring. And so I've had a couple of people ask me about that.
Yeah.
I'll make a generic answer to that, and that is, as the level of service continues to rise, so does the level of funding need to appropriately follow.
We wouldn't be able to just swap one.
We don't just have extra guys sitting around. So, I mean, we have resources that are limited throughout the year, and if we're going to add another whole service, that's going to have some resources that go with it.
The bag pickup? What about bag pickup?
That's in our waste hauling contract. So our waste hauling contract allows for bag pickup for free throughout the month of December, but not in the spring.
Not in the spring, though.
Okay, anybody else with any project questions? If not, we'll move into other. Does anybody have any other? Okay, Joe.
I have another.
Go ahead.
I would like to thank Chief Ewell and Chief Dyke for their participation with their departments on Saturday, leading the Batavia Marching Band out of town as they went down to Champaign for the state championship. I'm happy to report that they placed 5th in their class, and out of all of the 4A to 6A bands, they finished 10th in that group of 3 classes. So thank you, Chiefs, for that. I'm sure the kids had a great time seeing that support coming from the community.
Very nice.
I'm just sad I missed it. I wasn't there when they left. It's always fun to see. Those that took videos and shared them, thank you. Okay. There are no other. We'll move on to executive session for potential litigation. A motion to go into executive session?
Moved.
Second.
Motion by O'Brien, second by Meitzler. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries. We will now go into executive session, and we will be back for action afterwards.
We have to let them know we have to clear the room.
That's good.
Right.
What's the story about the game Saturday?
Put it in cement.
We're 99% sure we're going to be able to do it.
Brilliant
We have
by
to
him. Let's wait till they put
tomorrow
the sidewalk
to
in and then say no.
get the full okay from
Knowing
IHSA.
Roger?
Can the team win the game?
No.
Oh, yeah.
You have it all
Is Thornwood any good?
buttoned up beforehand.
Sure.
I'll say this, I think they're kind of a weird, dangerous team. They're very much like Simeon was a couple of years ago. They talk a lot, they're pretty boisterous, and they got a couple of good
What
athletes.
town are they from?
I can't remember what Thornwood is. What,
Thornton's down there, but
no, it's not.
south suburb?
Yeah.
I'd have to look that up. We're about ready to go back into regular session. Yes. Okay. We're ready to go back into regular session. We'll have a roll call.
Miller,
Here.
Rosato,
Here.
Beck,
She has stepped out for the moment. She will be back.
Knopp,
Here.
Chanzit, Salvati,
Here.
Wolf,
Here.
O'Brien,
Here.
Callahan,
Here.
Meitzler,
Here.
Malay,
Here.
Ewer,
Here.
Saron,
Here.
and McFadden.
Here.
Back.
We already got.
Let the record reflect, Alderman Beck is back. Okay. First item or next item on the agenda is Resolution 19-113-R, authorizing payment of $27,110.21 to the Illinois Municipal Broadband Association for the city's dues. Alderman O'Brien?
It's, as you said, it's for the city dues. Anybody have any comments or questions? Anybody wish to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Salvati, second by Saron. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Consent agenda?
I think that can go on consent.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Gary.
And now for everybody's highlight of the evening, we'll start off our discussion for our 2020 budget.
You're leaving?
Everybody got the big white book? Okay.
So,
Good evening.
the 2020 draft budget was distributed and posted online on Friday. There have been a couple of amendments for typos, nothing that changes any of the dollar values, just some typos in the letter, and those have been corrected and posted online. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to review it in very much detail yet. This slide, I repeated the same information from the 2019 budget, and honestly, some of the numbers hardly changed at all. It's very similar to what our 2019 budget was for overall, for all funds, of $135 million. This is the most important information to look at as part of the budget. It summarizes our revenues, expenditures, the surplus and deficit in the general fund, and each of our three utilities. And it pulls out the capital and other spending, showing our operating expenditures, the reserves that we will have on hand at the end of the year, and what that number of days that represents. So the general fund has a very good balance or it's projected to have a very good balance of 159. And 60 is the minimum, but as we've discussed, having more reserves is certainly beneficial. It just depends on what level they get to, and at that point, we should discuss how to spend down some of those reserves. Electric, water, and sewer will meet the 90-day criteria. Sewer has had some drawdowns for expenditures that they've advanced for the wastewater treatment plant, so those are a little bit high, but they will spend down.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
For our reserves, does the higher, obviously, 159 is unbelievable. How does that impact our bond rating?
We have a very good bond rating because of, that's one of the factors. They actually have, I think, 7 criteria that they rate us on.
But if we decided as a policy to bring that number down, let's say we brought it down to 90 or 110, do you think that would that affect our bond rating?
Maybe slightly, but not significantly. They're more concerned with making sure that you have policies and that you're looking at every year. If you are using cash in lieu of borrowing, you just explain that when you're going through the ratings review. And then the water utility will only have 97 days of operation if we borrow $5 million. So that is definitely part of the budget for a combination of revenue bonds and IEPA loans. The water department, kind of on the back end of the stormwater project, it was decided that all of the water mains in Area 3 and Ward 1 would be replaced in conjunction with it. so that we wouldn't have to go back. And it makes sense, but we weren't prepared for it, and so it drew down our cash. So now we're going to need to borrow for those. So the general fund is our main operating fund for the city, and we have 29 million of expenditures and 28.5 million of revenues, and this just breaks it out by department, showing how those funds are spent. We have expenditures in the general fund for the utilities that are in Department 1075 that are negative expenditures because they're actually funds coming in from the utilities to pay for their share of general fund costs. For example, the electric, water, and sewer do not have an HR department, they don't have a finance department, and they have to pay for administration of the city and those types of things. And this is just a chart showing how what categories our general fund expenditures are. And I spend more time on the general fund than on the water and sewer and electric utility, not because those are not important, but they're supported mainly by rates, whereas the general fund is supported by taxes. And as you can see, the majority of these expenditures are related to employee costs. So some of the highlights in the budget this year, police vehicles, it's considered a capital expense, but it's really more of an operating expense because they have their vehicles on a rotation, and it's about the same amount, give or take, depending on if they're replacing a unmarked car or a marked car. And then for technology, $250,000. 100 of that is to pay for copier replacements throughout the city. The entrance signs, the columbarium is a carryover from this year. It wasn't completed. We do have $25,000 designated from a donation from a private citizen that we'll be using towards that. We have $40,000 for some business recruiting for economic development, and the largest portion of our general fund increase was for wages, which was $765,000. That was a question that was brought up in review of the budget. I don't know if any of you saw the email I sent out where we responded to those questions, and it's also posted on the website. Yes.
Question for you on the copiers.
Yes.
Do we buy those outright? We do. Is there a reason why we prefer to buy them outright rather than lease?
It's on. Thank you. We have looked at leasing in the past. When you hold copiers for a longer period of time like we do, it just pays to buy them outright.
Okay. All right.
That's why.
How long has it been since we kind of spent that much money in?
I think they're going to be about 8 years old.
Okay. I was going to say, I couldn't remember how long it's been since we did them.
It's been a while. We had one copier, Public Works, I think this year, down for maybe about a week, almost a week, because they were finding parts and trying to replace it. Plus, we pay based on the number of copies we make. So, as the longer we keep them, the higher maintenance we pay.
Mimeographs are tough to replace nowadays, so.
And we did replace the copier here at City Hall this past spring, and Howard was able to find a very reasonable price on, was it a state purchasing contract?
It was a state purchasing contract with another state, but I was able to persuade them to give us that same price.
And it was significantly less than the initial quotes he was looking at. So we're hopeful that when we look at the rest of them, that we'll be able to get similar pricing. So this is a chart that just breaks down that larger wage number in between wages, overtime, standby pay, taxes and pension, and health and work comp insurance, and then training. The bulk, of course, is for the wages. And as Laura mentioned in her letter, we were very pleasantly surprised for our health insurance that it only increased 0.9% for our contributions for next year. And we're hoping then with the addition of the HMO plan that we'll even see lower costs.
When do you think you'll be able to see what savings the HMO will offer?
So we should know
Is it after
which
this enrollment
employees
period?
have selected. Yes, we're in our open enrollment period right now because we're on a calendar year. So we should know or have the ability to make an estimate of the savings once we know what selections have been made for this year.
Right. When we signed up with the IPPC, which is the cooperative that we participate in, we chose the option to have them do a reconciliation just once a year. So rather than have them bill us our actual costs, they set a defined bill amount and then do a reconciliation at year end. So we won't see the full effect cash-wise until then. And honestly, there might be a lot of people that are a little leery at first, so I would expect to see more participation in the second year. So as part of the budget, we had several staff requests. The only one that we have included in this budget is the economic development manager that Laura had talked to you about a month ago due to the retirement of our current contract economic development person. Not funded, but requested were an increase to hours for full-time status to 30 hours for the administrative assistant in HR. As part of last year's budget, there were 5 hours added, and this is requesting to add 5 more, but was not funded. The finance budget analyst was not funded. The police department has been working on solutions to avoid paying overtime pay to fill the records positions for nighttime hours and weekends. It's difficult because part-time employees find full-time work and leave, and those positions need to be filled, and they're backfilled with overtime by record staff and unfortunately by the officers. So this is something that I think that maybe you might want to consider adding back in, because in actuality, it would probably end up being a reduction in cost. We just don't have good data on that yet. And then the wastewater, it's not part of the general fund, but didn't want to put it all by itself. Had asked for an increase from 30 hours to 40 hours for their administrative assistant there. I had asked for some more information on that from Byron, but he wasn't able to get back to me today to support that request. So it has not been included as of today. And the costs for those positions are all in the individual departments. If you wanted to see what that would cost, they're listed out in the salary section of those departments. And then general fund revenues that are supporting our expenditures for 2020. Our sales taxes, we're budgeting level for 2020. They came in under what we had budgeted. We had budgeted level this year compared to 2018, and they didn't quite meet that. They're not drastically down, but they're a little bit down. And we expected that they would probably see some continuing decreases as people decide how they want to shop for, the gap of Sam's Club closing. I think we'll maybe see people continue to maybe go to other communities to find that club experience. But in the same token, we do have other stores that have opened that add to our sales tax base. Then our utility taxes were lower this year and so we're budgeting for a small increase for next year. Electric revenues were really down in 2019. This summer was a rather cool, wet summer, and so we just didn't see people using their air conditioning, and that happens from time to time. If we look back at trends, we can see when the weather, and then it did come back. So we'll monitor that and make sure that that's the reason for the decreased consumption. Use tax, that's continued to increase. The online sales tax is paid through our use tax. We don't know how or what contributes to it. We get no kind of reporting from the state of Illinois. They collect the tax. They do some gymnastics with it, take their share, and then give us some. So we've just been happy to see an increase in that. And also then cannabis tax will be distributed by the state through use tax. So we added a token amount of $30,000 for that first year.
While we're here on the use tax, would the online sales for cars be included in that? Or is that going to be just a general sales tax that's collected at point of sale as the terminal in Illinois? Say there's, 6 online outlets that are in town, and yet the cars are picked up here and paid for here, so they should be billed out and taxed here.
Vehicles are taxed a little bit differently, and it should be at the origin of the purchaser for where they're for. So if it's 60510, if it's online, I believe it should come through, but I'm not sure.
Is there any way to track that to know? Because I know we've had a lot of these, online sales, auto sales places that have popped up in town. I just wonder if we can track.
Well, the ones that have a physical location,
Right.
we've been able to track.
Okay.
But the online sales, we have no idea what online retailers are reporting to the state of Illinois, and we have no way to audit it.
One thing I wanted to mention about the use tax associated with cannabis sales is that they're saying that they're going to return 8% of the taxes, but they're going to distribute it through the LGDF. What's interesting is that the 8% has restricted use. So it will be the first time that a restricted use tax is being passed through the LGDF, and we're not sure how we're supposed to know what comes through LGDF, what proportion of that represents the cannabis tax. So this is something that needs to be addressed in the trailing legislation that's coming.
Nobody seems to be able to tell you what is the tax rate in the LGDF either.
The rate that they've been making.
12% under the 1970 Constitution, and now we think it's between 5 and 6, maybe.
Yeah.
I think it was lowered to 11% when they passed the income tax
Yeah, but
increase.
Then they kept diverting parts of it.
Yeah. Those are administrative fees.
Several governors all had their hand in moving things along there.
So that is something for us always to keep in the back of our minds, is that we may not be able to count on that always as a source of revenue, but hopefully that will continue. We have some higher development-related revenues that are included in the 2020 budget. We also had higher development-related revenues this year. We had Prairie Commons and the developments out at by Walmart there.
Windmill Landings.
Windmill, okay. Windmill Landings and other permits for some very large industrial permit for Suncast that is coming in this year. So those are non-recurring. We can't rely on those for an ongoing source of operating revenue, but occasionally we will see some increases to those types of revenue. And also permit revenue is up quite a bit for 2019, and we're expecting the same level or higher for 2020. And then income tax, also part of the LGDF, it's about $200,000 higher this year than what was budgeted.
Back to those developments, will we see any of the tax increment from the development this year, or is that down the line?
Generally, the assessor has to have it on the tax rolls, so the person has to be living there, I think, as of January 1.
Oh, really? Okay.
So there will be some revenue based on the developer owning the property, but not significant. But we'll start seeing that increase, but we won't see any revenue unless we levy more taxes, because that's the only way that we would collect the money. We have to levy for it. So our EAV will increase, but the only way to capitalize on that increase is to ask for more money through the tax levy. It's not automatically granted to us.
And so one of the policy decisions to make going forward is, up to now, we haven't been, capturing the additional EAV. But given the rising, we know that given the increase in wages and pensions and what everything costs every year, that is one of the ways to be able to afford future escalating costs.
And I'm going to talk about that quite a bit more in the next few slides here. So this budget includes a $500,000 revenue increase to offset a $500,000 expenditure increase. The pension for fire and police, and for the first time for a while, IMRF, all increased for us for 2020, and they totaled $500,000 in increases, which were pretty big hits for the budget. Partially related to, we have a 12/31 year end, and the actuarial reports are based on whatever the assets were at that date. Very poor on 12/31/18, so we felt the impact through the actuarial report. Hopefully next year we'll see some rebound and not have that kind of impact.
Is the stuff that went out today about pension reform for police and fire, is that going to have any impact?
Someday, maybe. There will be a lot of costs associated with consolidating those pension funds.
And that the consolidation, my understanding, is to occur no sooner than 2023.
So no.
Eventually, it could be. And right now, I know the IML is working very closely, watching the way the legislation is written to make sure that the municipalities that are funding their pension funds appropriately, that their assets are protected and segregated appropriately. So I'm sure we don't have that to worry about. It's just, will assets have to be sold in order to combine them and those kinds of things? Will you be forced to take losses to get them into the one fund? I don't know how they're going to handle that yet. This is just a chart that shows you the history of our sales tax. You can see that we peaked our sales tax in 2015 was our high year there, but it has not dropped off too terribly, considering that we know without saying how much money we were getting from Sam's Club. So it's been nice to see that it hasn't dropped off significantly. So property tax, the EAV is expected to increase 3.2%. In my letter, if any of you have that, I was missing the zero. I had 1.4 billion. It's not 1.4 billion. It's 1.04 billion, which is a large amount when we're talking billion. And then with the 500,000 increase for the levy, that would be a 3% increase for the city's portion of the tax bill, and it would be 0.3% increase to the total tax bill, using the rate that was in the 2018 levy collected in 2019. So the owner of a $300,000 home would pay $24 more per year based on that $500,000 increase, which would equate to $2 more per month for city services. The rate would change from 73.5 cents to 75.9 cents, so about 76 cents, based on the estimates that we currently have. We can't say with complete accuracy because not all Board of Review assessments have been processed and the final values haven't been put in place yet. So if we were to go ahead with what's in the budget right now, we would have to do, we would be subject to a notice provision for a black box publication. You've probably all seen those advertisements in the newspaper. They have a big black thick border around them saying notice of property tax increase. It has to be in the regular portion of the newspaper, not in the legal section. You have to do that anytime your tax levy increases more than 5%. If we were to have a public hearing on the 19th, we would have to publish that notice by the 11th. The paper has told us they would need that decision by next week. That's a very short notice, so we could change the public hearing to be the 26th. I'll be out of town, but I'm sure that Laura would be able to do it. If you decided to go ahead and have the black box notice, it wouldn't mean that you're agreeing to a property tax increase. What it would mean is that you're considering one, and it would notify the public that they could come and place input on that. So even if you decided to move forward with that, it wouldn't mean that you're committed to making the property tax increase. So with that schedule, we would be able to pass the tax levy either December 2nd after the budget is passed or December 16th. It has to be after the budget, though. If you didn't want to even have the black box notice, your choice next choice would be to increase it up to 4.9% so that you wouldn't be subject to the notification, and that would be a maximum amount we could increase would be $360,000, and that would cover the increase for the fire and police pensions, but it would not cover the IMRF increase. No public hearing would be required then, and we would need to cut $55,000 out of operations to be able to say that we have a balanced operating budget, and the deficit would then be equal to the amount of capital that we have in the budget, and it would be $574,000. And then something we would have to think about is how future gaps would be funded. And then the last, I received a question late this afternoon from one of you, is how much would you be able to increase if you were under the tax cap? And that would be probably in the $200,000 range, but when entities are under the tax cap, because it's unknown, generally they request quite a bit over so that they can capitalize on and capture all of the increase that they are eligible for. So we would likely levy an increase higher, but because we're home rule, we would get it. So that would be something that you would have to discuss on how you would want to handle that. But if we were under the tax cap, other things that we would have had to consider at the time that you decided to issue the debt for the storm sewers, well, we wouldn't have been able to issue debt without a backdoor referendum, and how we would pay back that debt would have been something that we would have had to talk about at the time. We wouldn't have been able to do probably to the extent that we are doing now for all the capital projects. And we wouldn't have likely increased for the new police officer and the building inspector, because we wouldn't have been able to fund that completely with a property tax increase. So it would have been a very different situation from where we are currently. and this is just to talk about, if you really don't want to increase property taxes, we have to talk about sustainability and things that we could consider. I just listed some things here that would be ways that we could save money. Some of them are more drastic than others, but they're all things that you could read through and discuss. But definitely, we wouldn't be looking to expand staff in any way. We would have to probably look to downsize through attrition. Now, one of the things that I didn't really discuss in my letter, I think Laura mentioned it a little bit, is we could look at adding home rule sales tax. We're equal to Geneva and St. Charles at 8% right now, but Aurora is quite a bit higher, depending on what county you're in when you're there, and Elgin is also higher, again, depending on what county. So that would add a source of revenue, but it's not something you would want to count on from year to year, because you wouldn't want your sales tax rate to be way higher than your neighbors, because that would be, at one point, it would have a negative effect with losing sales tax. So that is something that actually, when we were planning out for a future year's budget, is something that we were talking about proposing maybe mid-year next year, because there are notice provisions with the state that you have to notify them by October 1 to have the tax be effective January 1. So that was something that we were talking about possibly bringing for consideration later summer for implementation for the following year.
I saw you had in there a 1/4% is pretty substantial. What was it, $900,000 or something?
Yes, 0.5% would be 1.8 million. Because right now we have 1% and we get about 3.6 million. So it's significant. And you can pass increases in 1/4% increments. So you could do a 1/4 or a 1/2. But we didn't have that in this year's budget. We could put it in this year's budget for collection in July, if that is something that you wanted to entertain. Are there any discussions on or questions on the property tax portion?
One other question. I know we missed the January 1 deadline. What's the deadline for July?
April 1.
April 1.
Does anybody have any questions so far?
I just, on the sales tax too, you have to be very careful about that, because that's not just retail. You're talking companies that are based here. You talk about this car,
Right.
the online car sales.
That's an advantage.
It's a huge.
And we still have spaces to fill on Randall Road that I think that's both stuff that's already built and things that aren't built yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's something I don't want to really go after yet.
Right.
Dangerous.
It's really a tough decision to make. And when I was talking to Laura about it, the smaller retailers are actually, the ones that may be more impacted, where, especially if they sell. Now, car sales aren't subject to home rule sales tax, so it would not affect car sales. But higher end purchases, I don't want to point out any store in particular, but, if someone's looking to buy something unique and they look and see what they might consider sales tax, going one community to another. So that is something, and that's why it wasn't included right now. But it is something to think about, because it would be a revenue source that we could put in place.
If we stayed underneath the tax cap number and came up short on what we need for pensions, what would that do to our days of reserve if we took that out of reserves? Would it just take a couple days away from it?
Yes, it would not be a significant impact. You could do that.
Is that something that, I know we've talked about that in the past, you know, if there was a small number that we needed to make to reduce a tax change, that if we could do it with reserves and not impact them severely, that was something that we should always consider.
We've done that before.
Right, and that's something that I think of, but I also think of, I don't want to get us a little step at a time, and the property tax increase, I think, is better than realizing a year or 2 or 3 from now that we have to make a big jump. Because I think that's a harder decision to throw on a future council than it is to say, okay, we made a little progress or we made a little movement in it, now you have to keep moving that way to stay current with what we need to fund things with.
Yeah, I think actually that would be the bigger thing to consider, because we do have good reserves, is just to understand that there does need to be some kind of incremental revenue source coming in to offset operating increases. And if you don't, if you use reserves, and maybe there might be enough for you to use reserves in a future year as well, but at some point you need to be open to some kind of revenue increase, whether it be property taxes or sales taxes or vehicle stickers, but that is not a popular one either.
And I wanted to say too, I don't think it's a good idea to use reserves to cover ongoing expenses. If we were using reserves to pay for one-time things, say stuff at City Hall, and a capital expense here or capital expense there, I much easier time saying yes to that. But if we're saying, okay, I'm going to take my reserves and I'm going to use that to pay my bills every month, reserves don't last for that.
Right.
There has to be an income source coming in to pay for those.
And one of the things that we have in the general fund, 1090, is the transfers to debt service and capital funds. Those are incremental transfers to capital items. They're not for capital expense. They're going to those funds to set money aside for necessary capital spending. We have them for public works vehicles, fire apparatus, and there was a long answer on that in the question and answers if you haven't had a chance to read them. But we look at the funding for that and plan it out and look at the dollar amount that's coming in for from permits, because we do get some permit fees for those through fire and public works capital development fees, and then we schedule it out. So reducing that funding impacts the ability to buy those vehicles in future years. But this also smooths the spending so that we're not buying a $700,000 fire truck in 1 year, because we've slowly saved for it. They're basically like savings accounts. But other capital transfers for street, the plan is to slowly increase that so that we increase the funding for our resurfacing program based on what Rahat has shared with you earlier about our need for that. And then also the drainage capital funds.
Before we get
Alan?
Go ahead, Joe.
You brought up a point, and it was something I had written down, a one-time $500,000, taking it out of reserve and paying something else, being the police and fire and the IMRF, and avoiding a property tax increase again. We got the home rule vote last year, and the city council's response last year was to increase property tax, which is exactly what the people trying to defeat home rule said was going to happen. We come back and do it again this year. They say, look, they did it again. If we've got an opportunity to spend down reserves as a way of avoiding a property tax increase, I think that's a win-win.
Okay.
Peggy, one question I would have.
Mm-hmm.
It appears to me, at least, in being down here every day and specifically talking with our friends in the building department and being on the street, working in that world, we've had seemingly an inordinate amount of remodeling and additions and replacements in town on a lot of property. And I'm of the opinion that we should see, I think you saw some of it here, but I mean, I would think our property tax rate, not rate, but our revenue should continue to be going up. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's been done this year that I don't think was reflected in the tax rate yet because it has probably hit the assessor's desk. But I know Jeff is telling me, God, we've had a lot of remodeling this year. Some of the better years we've ever had. It's been what's going on here. So I think that's, you know, to kind of feed on this idea of, you know, where our revenues are coming from. I think we may have a little bit more coming at us there in the next couple of years than we've had previously. So
For the growth in the EAV?
Right.
Yes, we were at 1.008 billion in 2018, and the estimate right now is about 1.04. So about a $30-some million increase in value. And the way you capture that is through an increase to the levy. So certainly, you would want to increase the levy to capture at least that new value.
yeah, I guess I would subscribe to, you know, maybe we should look at the reserve a little bit, but I think there's could be a mixture of several different numbers here that could keep us still. And I would just point out that the 73 cents that we're carrying right now is one of the lowest in the region for a city our size.
Definitely, it's the, Geneva is the only lower one in the area. Some fire districts are actually higher than our rate, and they're just a fire district.
And what I was going to say is, I think before we move much further, I think we should talk about the fact, do we want to have the public hearing noticed and out there so that we can discuss possibility of doing the levy and the tax increase so that it's there, or do we want to wait, have another meeting, and then tag that right after that? I don't know logistically if that's how we want to handle it, or do we want to go ahead with noticing it now and then make the decision at the public hearing?
I think it's okay to have the notice out there. I think we should have it as a safety net in case we cannot come to some sort of agreement that we can't avoid it. I mean, we'd be foolish to not have that as a safety net. I think we're going to try and come up with enough creative ideas to avoid it, but that's my thought.
I would agree, keep options open. Not making a decision.
Anybody else? Or are we in agreement to go ahead and publish the notice so that it's out there? Plus two, I think that also gets it out into the public's eye that, you know, we'll have feedback and comments beforehand, not after we do something.
We put in the notice we reluctantly are putting that.
Actually, the state statute is, it's written out how you have to word it.
You have to word it.
And
We put an advertisement next to it.
good tax attorneys read those and look for missing commas or and object based on any error in that notice. So it has
We
to
have
be.
a couple people in town that are actually going to read it as such to look at that for those issues.
You think?
Yep.
Never.
But again, what that does is it just establishes a date for a public hearing. It doesn't require you to pass any increase at all. It just means that it's being considered.
And I think that would be good for us to know, maybe you can have the numbers ready for us, what it would be at the rate that we're at now, at the different rate that would cover all of the costs for the pension if we went from, what was it, 73 to 76?
Yes.
Have those numbers there, and what it would be if we left the rate at the same number and used reserves to cover the gap.
I'll
And
give you
then
all
we
of
have that stuff to
the
compare
information in
at
a
that
separate
meeting.
memo.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. And then, big year of, I didn't change the title on this one. It should say 2020. But a lot of construction going on next summer. We have Prairie Street reconstruction, at a cost of 2.7 million, our cost of 481,000. Main Street reconstruction, not including the water main or the lining of the sanitary sewer, but the separation of the sewer is included here. 6.8 million, our cost 3 million. Resurfacing program is in the motor fuel tax fund at 1.6 million, plus another 200,000 for a crack fill program. And then also the decision was made to fully resurface the Area 3 and Ward 1, both this year in 2019 and in 2020, so that all of the infrastructure in those areas is new. And so there is a cost in the street fund for that portion of it. Just the incremental increase for the full resurfacing from patching is being paid by the street fund. And then the other projects of curb, sidewalk, parking lot patching, pavement preservation are in the street fund at 712,000.
I think the first two should be big bold letters so that everybody remembers and sees what our cost is on those two projects.
Yes. It's fantastic that we had the Surface Transportation Program funding. That's what's making these projects possible. When there is surface transportation funding, the contracts are let by the state. So the construction engineering will be paid for by the city, and the state will pay for the construction and invoice us for our share of that. So that's how those two streets will work. But there will probably be some frustrated residents trying to get around town next summer. But it'll be nice to see those two arterial streets completed.
Let me just add that the bell is ringing on those projects. We got till October of 2020 to get the shovels in the ground, or the money comes off the table and it goes to this new thing that I'm already dealing with in Chicago called the shared fund. And you've got so much time in going forward now with the federal money to get the project up and moving, and if you don't, the money comes back and you lose it.
And that's why I think it's important that the public know that, and that we don't back away or don't shy away from discussing that, because I think it's really important that they see the actual cost of what it takes to do a street like that and what the city's share is when we have a grant like that.
Right, and it also goes to show why Rahad is always pushing on resurfacing, because once the street does fall into reconstruction, it's very expensive. And we are in a good place with that for funding for streets now, because we're getting the additional MFT money. So about $1 million in our MFT fund each year we'll have. And with the gas tax fully in the street capital fund and the transfer from the general fund, another 1.2. So right now, next year, we're funding streets at 2.2 million, and we're slowly going to increase that transfer from the general fund so that we'll get up to 2.5 or 2.6 million per year. So we're on a good path for that. And then the drainage projects are the completion of Area 3, that's a shared cost with sanitary sewer. I don't know if any of you pay attention to the numbers, but we used to put sanitary sewer capital in 3183, but it was always a reporting problem for us in trying to pull out the capital because it wasn't segregated. So now it's all under 3181 with wastewater treatment capital. It's just a separate line. It's the same fund that was coming out of it, was just an accounting change for that. And we will have IEPA loan money for that both in 2019 and 2020. And then we have Mahoney Creek in there, some study design, or I think it's preliminary work for studying that area, and Crestview Meadows. That contract was just put in place for this year, but it will continue into next year. Construction won't happen on that until 2021, though, right now is what the plan is. Ward 1 will continue next year with our bond funds, and we will have enough bond funds, the way it's planned right now, depending on how the contracts close out, to finish Ward 1 fully with the bond funds. And that will be in 2021. City Hall projects that are budgeted in 2020, recabling has been carried over a couple of times. There's some discussion of that in the question and answers that went out today. We also have building renovations that total $1,075,000. They're separated out as different line items, but they total up to that. And there is a CIP sheet for that in the back. There's also some jail and intercom work that was also carried forward. It wasn't done this year. And then we have a new roof at the Public Works building that's estimated at $500,000. The full cost is in the capital fund, with supplemented by a negative expense from water and electric as they share in the cost for the building. Do any of you have any questions on the City Hall capital, or would you like to wait to discuss it? There isn't sufficient funding there, so it's in there as some kind of funding of $1 million in order to achieve these projects.
So on the building renovation and the recabling, how much can that be combined? I know some of the issue has to do with, lead paint and things like that. So will the cost of the cabling come down because that's a consideration if we're already taking walls down and doing other things as part of the renovation?
I'll have to let Howard answer that question.
I don't know if the cost of the cabling will come down. I mean, they're still going to have to put it in a certain spot and terminate and so forth. I think if the renovation goes over multiple years, it would probably cost us more, having the company have to come out and set up again and clear areas. That's about the best thing.
And that's really just an estimate at this point. That's not any solid number that you have, is it, Howard?
It's based on a couple of things. One, the cabling work that we did a couple of years ago at Public Works. On top of that, we've had some issues with the paint in the ceiling. We had to throw some extra money to contain that. And I have no idea how much that's really going to cost us, but I did want to put some extra money in the budget for that project.
And would you address whether or not, how that impacts your phone upgrade and the new phones?
Well, the new phones run at a higher speed. Many of our computers run at a higher speed, but they're not capable of utilizing that with the cable that we have. We've also had to go in and make some manual adjustments to some of our switching devices and the network to accommodate some of the newer technology mixed in with the old cabling, which takes us a little bit longer when we bring in a new piece of equipment. That doesn't auto-negotiate. The cable that we have is easily over 20 years old. It's due to be replaced.
Would that project move forward if the City Hall remodeling did not?
Well, I think we have to. We've put it off at least 2 years now, waiting to see if we're going to do some remodeling. I think we have to go ahead with it. I think that if there is some remodeling, we can try and save some of the cable. We're trying to do some of that at Public Works with some of the work they're doing out there. But I think we're getting to a point where we just can't continue to put it off. It's just affecting people's work. It's affecting our work. I think we should move ahead with it.
Did you want to talk about the City Hall at all?
The renovation?
Yes.
So this project was initially planned in 2016 and presented for the 2017 budget. At that time, there were, the primary concerns were trying to improve the efficiency of the building, to put the services that were more public-facing on the main floor as a convenience, and to improve the efficiency of our operations. But, with the recent shooting that happened in a workplace down in Aurora, we followed that up with active shooter training here. And a number of our employees expressed concerns that we try to protect as many employees as possible in the design of our public buildings. And in that regard, the renovations that are requested here address those concerns in a number of ways. Restricting access to the second floor. Anybody who's coming into the building would need to sign in at a reception area that they come to immediately when entering. As you know, right now, when you enter City Hall, you can walk anywhere you want. The reception desk is on the second floor and is not always manned, which gives people access to go anywhere in the building. And they can, they stop at the front desk. Once they go to the utility billing, then the very next adjacent office is human resources, and that poses concerns to us as well. And so there are a number of real employee safety concerns that would be addressed by the changes that are planned as part of these renovations.
And then when we talk about funding, we would have had considerably more funding available for the project next year, except the new roof at Public Works is an expense that we weren't expecting in 2020. Gary had brought it up to Laura and myself, I think, maybe a year, late last year, and said it was coming, but evidently it is coming sooner.
As roofs sometimes do it.
Right.
On their own schedule.
And that building itself, it needs a roof probably to stay together.
That building's from the late 1980s, so I mean, it's the original roof.
So the funding options are, we could issue debt, but more realistically, we do have very good reserves in the general fund, and our policy states that when we have excess reserves, the one option is to transfer the money to a capital fund. Now, it doesn't have to be the building capital fund, but we know that many of the items that are being addressed aren't just to move offices around. It's to address safety issues and, the egress issues this year are being addressed on the second floor, but ease of access for those visiting the building. Utility billing did used to be downstairs right here, and when we went through the financial sustainability, we were down, we didn't have a supervisor, and we're down to only 2. We had 4 people in the department and went to 2, and we needed to move them upstairs so that they could be closer to finance, because there was no way to move finance down here. So they've remained up there, but it makes sense that they should be on the first floor. The most visitors to the building are utility billing and community development.
What is each day of reserves equivalent to?
I had the number, but if we were to fund both phases, which would be about 1.7 million, we would draw down the reserves from 159 to 131.
28 days is 1.7 million?
Yes.
Could do that, Matt.
60,000.
And that number is a changing number, because our operating expenditures change each year. So it's really just to kind of give you a gauge of how many days could you continue operating next year if your revenues were cut off, but you had to keep paying the bills.
So just to clarify there, I mean, at roughly 80 grand a day, right?
61.
You're looking at basically drawing down the reserves by about 22 to 25 days, which really presents the problem for 2024 that you were showing us in terms of projected revenue, projected reserves for the days of operation. So we may be able to do that for the now, but we have to
No, I
really
get it.
factor
I'm
that in
not
for the
saying
5-year
let's
plan.
do it. I just wanted to know the amount.
And one of the things that's different in that 5-year projection from last year is last year's ramped up the funding to the street capital fund up to $1 million in that last year, which dropped down the reserves, I think, to 27 days, and included no revenue increases. This analysis includes slight revenue increases to the property tax to offset the increase in the fire and police pension. It does not include an increase for the IMRF pension, but it definitely is covering those because we levy specifically for those pension funds, and when the contribution increases, that reduces our operating tax levy by whatever that amount is. So that is included in the projection, and if the thinking is that we wouldn't do that, that would change that scenario. So I just want to make sure that you are aware that that's been included. And we don't know what the increases will be for fire and police. It's just been estimated. But basically, it's a wash. Whatever that estimate of the increase is, we've increased the revenues.
So one of the questions about paying for this is also using TIF. You said $300,000 could be used from TIF. I mean, even if we just said the recabling came out of TIF, and that's half of that tax increase right there that we could offset as a thought. I mean, I look at anything with TIF. I mean, you said infrastructure is what it has to be used for, and it's like it's tomato. Either we use it today or we wait for some other project to come up, but either way, we still have to pay for all of these things, so they don't go away.
Right. We know that we would like to see some future development happen, but we're also on a time window with TIF 1.
Yeah, that got extended, but what is that to?
It will end in 2028, I think. Or is it 2024? Yeah. Yeah, maybe it is 2024. So, very short window then.
Yeah.
But we also know, I mean, we did budget for One Washington Place to start, and there was some infrastructure costs that, in the agreement that we were going to be doing, some of the costs, so that we were going to use TIF increment in the existing TIF to fund.
And is there only 300,000 in that TIF?
No,
Or is there a max?
that's what I factored in as additional. If One Washington Place does not happen, there will be additional money. Because we won't need to put that infrastructure in.
So the 300,000 you're talking about would be what's
It's-
left in one after we spend money on One Washington?
Yes. There are still outstanding loans on the books for when we put in Houston Street, but those will all be paid up next year.
I'm sure that 300 grand a TIF though, I mean, obviously it'll qualify, but by right, we're not getting any tax increment by doing these improvements to a government
That's right.
building.
We didn't see it for River Street either, and the TIF paid for almost all of River Street and all of Houston. The streetscape projects were TIF projects. And that was a discussion. It was probably before you were on the council. on whether or not the city should use TIF funding for that. But it was discussed also with the various taxing bodies, the school and the park and the other taxing bodies, on whether or not they would be supportive of it, and they were.
But in theory, that block, those properties should have increased in value.
Not from the streetscape project.
You don't think the streetscape improved the value?
Well, I'm not an assessor, but I would say that the street in front of your building wouldn't affect the value of your building.
But the property value does. If there's a higher demand for it, it does.
Yes, if you're getting higher rents, yes.
But we don't pay tax on this building, so there
Right.
can't be any tax increment.
Right.
But the surrounding area, I believe the homes in the surrounding area, property values did increase in the surrounding area of River Street, I believe. And I think it was due to...
Well, certainly there's been an economic boost to the area, and we've seen benefits from that project.
Right.
And from Houston Street as well.
Infrastructure beneath the street improved as well when you did those projects,
Right.
which is a contribution to attracting further development to the area.
So I just threw it out there as something that you could consider, because this building is in the TIF, and you could utilize some of those funds if you chose to. You certainly don't have to. And we could borrow, but we know we're going to be issuing revenue bonds, probably revenue bonds for the water fund rather than GO bonds, if One Washington Place goes through, because if you issue 10 million in bonds or less, you can have them be bank qualified, which means you get a slightly lower interest rate. So we would want to use that for the TIF project, and any additional borrowings, even if it's from a bank, would count against us for that 10 million. But if One Washington Place doesn't happen and we don't borrow for that, we could certainly borrow for this project and issue GO bonds for the water utility. Some of the things are unknown as far as what type of debt at this point, until we know for sure what's going to happen with that project. Any other questions on this, or you don't need to make a decision on how that's funded tonight? Certainly, I just want to make sure that I explained the options for you. And then I'll just quickly cover the utilities because I know it's late. We have no rate increase for 2020. So the last rate increase we've had for the electric utility was in 2015, in May of 2015. And the PPAF, which is the additional charge for the difference in our purchase power, has remained steady since 2016. We've not, it's been 0.01825 cents. It goes up and down. I calculate it each month based on the information I receive from the electric utility. And because we have the rate stabilization fund, we're able to balance that rate out and keep it steady for everyone. And even with current projections, we should be able to keep it at that level for 2020. 2021, it would probably be unrealistic to think that we could go that much longer without some type of rate increase, but it shouldn't be anything that's substantial. We've seen St. Charles has increased their rates, and their rates are a little bit different than ours, but they have definitely rate classes that are higher than ours. So if that's something to be happy about. We aren't the highest rates in everything for our electric utility any longer. And there was just some discussion that ComEd customers are going to be seeing some increases too, which will bring them closer to what our rates are.
I don't think you've checked Facebook lately because that's not the prevailing attitude.
I try not to read it too much because it's just upsetting, because there is some misinformation, definitely, because people, I do read that they say, well, my rates have gone through the roof. Well, they haven't changed since 2015, and the PPAF has also remained steady, which means that the only possible reason is because they've increased their usage. But you can't really communicate that.
Sure, well, you can.
And tell them that.
I thought we were doing the, that's
you
the
can
reason.
communicate all day long.
I thought that was the reason we were doing the rolling blackouts. Usually on the east side.
Well, I do look at the funny memes for that.
We know when it happens.
Yeah.
So for the rest of the electric utility, we do, right now, the projection is that our purchase power and costs may increase some, but the NIMPA has not passed their budget yet, so we don't know for sure. We do have an power cost adjustment on our NIMPA bill, and we have quite a bit of money that we've paid to NIMPA over that they're holding. They've been paying back some of it to us, and now they just need to determine through their budget how much will be paid back. And Gary, was that decided through 2020 or?
The NIMPA will be paying back to its members $6 million over the 12-month period from January 1st to December 31st of 2020. We're currently paying back $4 million over the previous 18 months that'll end on December 31st of 2019. So, we've paid back $10 million. Our fund balance continues to rise.
So we receive 45.83% of that payback. So it's substantially reduced in our power costs and been the reason we've been able to have no rate increase so far. I did budget for a slight one, but if we don't have that increase, all the better, then our reserves will be in better position than we are now. Electric utility has $8.6 million in capital projects. They had $9 million in capital projects in 2019, and I think only about 2.6 million were completed, and the rest were carried over into 2020. But those should be completed by the end of 2020. The water utility, as I don't know if I mentioned the rate increase, so the only utility rate increases are water at 3% and sewer at 4%. Those haven't been approved by City Council. Ordinances need to be prepared and brought to the council to put those increases through. But when we were applying for our IEPA loans, we indicated that those would be presented to the council to support the debt payments for the wastewater treatment plant and the sewer separation and water mains. And that represents $1.15 a month for a user who uses an average of 950 cubic feet per month. So 5.8 million in capital projects, mostly water mains. The water treatment plant is going to need some capital improvements that will just get underway in 2020. Some of those are eligible for IEPA loan funding, but we don't know how much at this point. So we will need to issue bonds at some point to pay for all of the water main projects. We're still in a good place, though. It's natural to borrow money when you have large infrastructure projects. So we have to project out what those debt payments, repayments will be, and we're in a good position, even though we will be borrowing. And then the wastewater utility, the rate increase will be $2 a month for the average user. And treatment plant capital has $800,000 because the engineering for phase 2 of the capital improvements at the treatment plant will get underway next year. And they have some other equipment things that they'll be doing for, I think that total about 400,000. And then the sanitary sewer has the sewer separation projects for Main Street and Area 3. And those are funded by IEPA loans for the treatment plant and some of the sanitary sewer. We did start paying back on the loan for the wastewater treatment plant, but only the amortization schedule was only for 24 million, and we've received some drawdowns this year, so they will need to issue a new amortization schedule that will increase those payments when we do finally close out that project with the IEPA. So those are the same talking points we had in 2019 because I ran out of time, but they still all apply. Capital spending, need for staff, we've already talked about revenue sources and our cash reserves. Any questions that we can answer this evening?
Can I just go back to the whether or not the black box option?
Sure. I think I'll just end it and find it this way. So this is, if we did the way the budget is right now, it would require the black box publication. And the current public hearing would be scheduled for November 19th or November 26th. You could actually choose one of those dates tonight if you wanted. We were just looking to the earlier dates so that you have more time for discussion, but you could choose the later date if you wanted.
Can I just see the other slide for the under?
Sure. So there were two slides for no notice required. The maximum increase you could do with no notice would be 360,000. So it's 140,000 difference. And if you levied up to the maximum, in order to have an operating budget, we would need to look at 55,000 in cutting or in purposeful use of reserves.
I think that's, the more that I think about the whole black box issue, I know it was said as leaving all options out there, but it's kind of like being on a diet and seeing an unopened bag of cookies. The minute that you unopen it and say, I'm just not going to eat anything, you're going to want to eat it. And I'm going to be very hard pressed to even consider above 5. So I'm not in favor of putting the black box, even for discussion. I think we're going to get public input at going up to 5 anyways. And I just, with what I've read so far in here and options that we have out there, I just can't justify going over 5. So that's just me.
Well, and Marty, to your point, if we talk it through a little bit more and we say we're willing to use TIF to do improvements in this building, then that puts us in a better spot.
That's why I'm saying if you open it, you might be less inclined to be forced into other options.
Well, I also look at it, one of the other questions had to do with the monuments at $60,000. So either that's out of these funds that are not part of our budget, or it's a budget item, right?
No,
I don't understand the answer.
that might have been a little confusing. It was hard to write in an answer. It's probably easier to explain. We had funds that we had in a separate fund, not the general fund, because it had to be in a separate bank account, and we had to send copies of the bank statements to the state of Illinois for years. And then they released the money, and we closed that fund and put the money into the general fund. I set up an accounting designation for the cash, but it's in with all the other general fund money. And so when you want to spend it, you need to budget for it, because that's the authorization to spend the money. It's not sitting in a separate fund.
Okay.
And then when we spent it, it wasn't a budgeted fund because it was only for that purpose. And we didn't budget for the that program with the state of Illinois because the projects came in so rarely that there was no way to know, and we weren't required to have a legally adopted budget. But when you want to spend that money now, it does need to be budgeted, but it doesn't impact our operating budget. If it's because it's for a capital item. So when we're looking at a balanced budget, we take out all the capital to make sure at least we're covering our operating budget, because those types of expenditures occur year after year. So we want to make sure that we have revenues that will occur year after year to make sure that we're not going in the wrong direction. Capital items, and that's why it gets a little fuzzy, because some of our capital items kind of are recurring, like the police vehicles. Pretty much every year there's going to be a line item for that. But, you know, the revenues are just budgeted as well. So we don't know where we'll end up at the end of the year. But certainly if you didn't want to make the decision on the black box tonight, we have another meeting next Tuesday. You could decide next Tuesday then, and we could always choose the later date of November 26th to have the public hearing, so that you had more time to think about it.
You know, I just want to offer up the observation that all of us experienced the citizen-driven referendum that we were faced with to get rid of home rule power. And when that referendum went out there, it was defeated to the support of the city by almost 70% of the residents of town. So there was, I think, quite a statement of mandate or appreciation or confidence in the city council that you were handling things the right way. I don't know if, you know, publishing a black box at this point in time kind of goes against that grain, I guess I would suggest. And probably, you know, sends a real mixed message to a whole bunch of people who really, some of them who stuck their neck out, and others who really felt passionate about the good job that is being done here by you folks. So I guess I would suggest, given what I see, and, you know, that we tap into the reserve and maybe fine-tune this thing in other places. And I would be a supporter of just forgetting the black box idea altogether for this particular year. And I would note that, you know, trying to keep an eye on what's going on around here, it would appear that, you know, a number of increases in EAV specifically are on the horizon for Batavia. We got a couple big things being built out in the industrial park. We got more things happening downtown. We got some of the biggest projects, if they come to fruition, that have ever been built in the history of Batavia at Washington and Wilson, and probably down at Main and Batavia Avenue if some of this stuff starts coming out of the ground. So the future, at least for the moment, looks like we are going to have the opportunity that Peggy will be able to add up a lot of new revenue coming at us. And I sit here, and after I've been in Chicago all day today and listening to some mayors that are in a total different situation where they don't have the new growth, they don't have the sales tax, they don't have anything, and there's some really sad stories out there that I have to hear. And on the train coming home every time I sit there thanking my lucky stars I am the mayor of the town where I am, because we've got an outstanding staff here who really keeps an eye on this thing and does a tremendous job of managing the assets and the money. And at the end of the day, we can sit here with some degree of confidence and luxury that, you know, yeah, we could get overly zealous and raise some things up here, but it's kind of going against the grain of the community sentiment that I think was so vividly illustrated with that 70% vote against the referendum for removing home rule.
Yeah, no, those are excellent points both you made. So, I mean, certainly no need to rush into it tonight. I also want to ask another question. If we have the police vehicles in our operating budget, if we moved it to capital this year? Is that
Well,
just gonna look at that?
they're a capital account within the general fund. So there's 574,000 of expenditures that are budgeted in a capital account. They're accounts that start with 6-4 and go on. So those amounts are removed when looking at the operating budget. And that's how we can say, even though when you look at the budget, it shows a deficit right now of 483,000. We say, well, we have a balanced operating budget because you would subtract the 574 from that number, which would bring us to a positive operating budget. But as the mayor pointed out, there are some things also to look forward to in 2020. We'll be having a census, and we will see some new revenues. I'm assuming there will be some growth there. I don't know if community development has any population projection numbers. Do you, Scott?
No, we've got building permits.
It won't be substantial, but we get the LGDF is the income tax and the use tax and the personal property replacement tax. Those are all based on population, and motor fuel tax, which will increase our street funding.
Don't forget about the annexations we've been doing, because that also add to it as well, besides the census numbers and then just the property taxes and everything else that we get from that, all those that we've done so far. So.
Right. So the reason it was presented to you with the property tax increases so that we would have a balanced operating budget, but it certainly would not be looked at negatively, I'm sure, by any of the rating agency. If when I speak to them, I say, well, it was the council's decision because we have such good reserves to not increase property taxes, they would be fine with that, I'm sure, especially because the dollar amount is not that much.
I just want to throw another word in here. I think if this city needs to do anything with itself, it's to maintain the high quality of public safety that we have here. And I'm going to be the first one on the table saying we need to, if the chief tells us we need 5 more police cars, we need 5 more.
I wasn't saying to get rid of them.
No, I'm not. I know you are.
Okay.
I'm just saying that those really are something that we seriously need here. It's like, we need a new fire truck. I mean, we got the money through the special fund, so we don't, that's not even, but I mean, those are the types of things that we need to have here to keep this place going in the right direction that it is, so.
I think maybe one of the larger issues is how you will address some of the items in your strategic plan to get some of those other things accomplished that you would like to see accomplished. And certainly we don't know how much the impact of preserving the depot pond, how much that will be on our budget. So those will all be things that will need to be discussed next year. But free money is always nice. So, and we know that the dam could fail. So it is certainly, it will need a discussion. All right, well, I think that I've probably kept you long enough for tonight.
And
So,
I think if you can get the numbers that we talked about earlier for what the daily cost for the daily days of reserve, what that would mean if we were to draw out of that, how that would be reduced for the different things we talked about.
okay,
And then, if we were to use the cap as a guide to raise tax on that, that's what we'd have to publish if we had to do the black box. It's not if we were to levy for more because we have a higher valuation, correct?
what the black box is, what if you levy 105% more than your prior year levy without debt. Debt is always taken out of the calculation. So whatever we levied or were extended, actually, last year, 5% over that. So 360,000 is that number. That's the most we could levy and not publish.
And that doesn't matter whether or not our
It has nothing to do with the rate.
Up
Right.
or the rate, okay. It's
That
just the dollar
is just
value.
the dollar amount.
Okay.
In effect, our overall rate could remain
Exactly the same, but we'd have to publish
But we would
it
still have to publish the black box notice.
if our valuation.
If our valuation, right, our valuation could grow and it wouldn't increase the rate at all, but we would still be required to publish the notice because the
And
levy.
that's one thing I guess that's one of the things I was trying to think about, because I know that that's happened to us before. In the time I've been on the council, we've had to publish that notice, even though we weren't going to raise the rate at all, because our valuation went up.
Right. That is a very good point.
So it's not like we're intentionally doing that, it's just the reality of.
Right.
I would rather be in that position.
Right. I understand that. But I also don't want to put us in, personally, I don't want to put us in that position 2 or 3 or 5 years from now where we don't have the reserves and we don't have the ability to do a small incremental increase. And that's why I think the cap kind of limits us and forces us to use the reserves that we have in small bits, not say we're not going to increase taxes at all, but we're going to spend it down on our reserves, and then 2 years come back and say, well, we don't have anything left in reserves, we've got to raise taxes X number of percent above what we normally would.
The only downside for if you follow that policy is we don't know exactly what those amounts will be. So I wouldn't be able to get it exact. And generally,
It's an idea.
like the school district will levy way more than they think they're going to get because they want to make sure they capture every penny. We would just have to look at the calculation based on the value and then decide what amount would be appropriate in that range. And you could always abate in the spring, but
He was ready.
So moved.
I didn't ask for it yet.
I know you didn't.
I'm going to look this way, though.
all right, well, if you have any questions, send them to Laura, myself, and we will publish the questions and answers for everyone to see.
Can you send us this PowerPoint too?
Yes,
I move we adjourn.
I will fix the typo before I send it.
There's one, you had a K instead of an M.
Okay.
A K instead of an M, oh yeah, because
Aye. We have a motion
Drew
and a
came by
second.
when I was still
All
typing
those in
at
favor?
Aye.
7.
Opposed? Hey, motion adjourned.
Nay.
Thank you.
Wait, was that a goat?
Hey, are you in the barn, Joe?
Was that a goat or a sheep?
Um,